All right, welcome to another ride-along video. So in this video, I want to give my first impressions of the Transition Sentinel on my local trails. So this is my second day of riding. I came out here over the weekend with Dawson, and we just did a little ride to get it broken in, get all the final adjustments made. And 1 week from uploading this video, I will be heading to the mountains to ride this thing for 4 days. Really looking forward to that, because this bike is totally overkill for cross-country trails. So before you go leaving comments of why do you have a bike like this in Florida? Well, I didn't get it for Florida. The first thing I want to mention is that I dropped a pound off the bike by taking the tubes out. And I put on the IRC Tankins. The tread profile is real similar to the stock tires. The Maxxis, Minion, DHF, and DHR. But these IRC Tankins seem to have a little bit stronger sidewalls. And these tires are just a tad heavier. So now this bike comes in about 32 pounds. I think if you pull the tubes out, add some sealant to the stock tires, you're probably going to get this bike about, I don't know, I'd say 31.8, 31.9, somewhere around there. So those tubes are heavy. I'm riding the flow wheels on this bike. I'll put the carbon ones on when they come in a month. And I can tell you, even with the flow wheels, one of the most impressive things about this bike that you can even notice out here is how stiff it is. And I noticed that when I was riding up in Washington State on my demo day on this bike, of just how this bike holds a strong line through, you know, rocks and chunky stuff that can throw a more flexible bike off its line. So a couple people have mentioned that they feel like this bike is a little heavy. I mean, 32 pounds without tubes for a 29er with 160 in the front. I think it's pretty on par. And my guess is that I'll probably drop another pound at least with the CB7 wheels, the Flow CB7s. And of course the ride quality should improve too, which is hard to believe because just the handling is awesome on this bike. So back to the weight. The reason that this bike would weigh a little bit more than you know, maybe another bike, Enduro 29, is because the frame is a little bit beefier. I mean, Transition's located up in the Pacific Northwest, just below Whistler. So those guys, they build their frames to handle some abuse and be stiff. So obviously the more material you put in a frame, the stiffer it's going to be. Right now I'm on a fire road that's about the gradient of fire roads that I ride in the mountains. So I'll just mention that this bike is a decent climber. No enduro bike is going to scale a mountain like a cross-country bike or even a short travel trail bike. But this one, it doesn't bob, and it still responds to bumps. Like here's a bump here. So it absorbs those nicely without bobbing while you're pedaling. So it'll bob a little bit out of the saddle, as you would expect. But if you just stay in the saddle and just plug along, this bike's a pretty decent climber. Obviously a 32-pound bike is, you're gonna feel it on the climbs, but you have an enduro bike, so you can just pedal to the top and light it up on the downhills, which is what I love doing on these bikes. One thing too that I'll mention before I get back into some single track here is the bars on this bike feel kind of closer to you, and I think that's for two Two reasons. I mean, the reach is pretty decent. I'll put the reach on the screen there. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's got a pretty good reach, but the stem is real short and the head angle's slack. So, you know, the fork's angling back towards you. And so the bars, they just feel closer to me than any other bike that I've ridden. But what that does is on the descents, it really increases the agility of this bike. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the descending characteristics of the bike until I get it up into the mountains next week. But I've already done a good day up at Galbraith Mountain on the demo, and I loved the way this bike descended. One thing that I'm already noticing out here is the fact that the cranks, you know, they're shorter, and so they don't have those pedal strikes. Sometimes going over routes, especially on a bike with longer travel, so you know, the suspension kind of compresses when you're going up a climb, hitting a root or a big rock, and you almost just kind of cringe and wait for that pedal to hit. And that happens much less on this bike. So we're gonna pop into some single track here, and I'm gonna do kind of a hilly section that has some short little downhills that I call just mountain samples, to kind of just help me know what this bike's gonna feel like when I do a good descent. Two things stand out about this bike on the descents. One is the stiffness, so that little bit extra frame material, and also just how playful it is for a 29er. Probably more so than any long travel 29er that I've used. The bike is playful and stable. This geometry, you can tell Transition's done their homework, because this geometry is just so dialed. And I have to be honest, you know, sometimes I jump back on my son's 650B 27.5 and I'm like, man, I kind of missed that bike. But getting on this bike, I don't feel like that. Something else that I'll mention about the geometry being stable. So we're starting to get leaves to fall since it's mid-October. And one of the corners back there, both tires drifted on the leaves. But it was really easy just to keep the bike under control. Wasn't an issue. Bikes with steep head angles, when the front tire starts to drift, you can get in trouble real easily. That's one thing I love about these slacker bikes, is you can get away with more if things start to get a little ugly. All right, so to wrap up my initial impressions, first of all, for cross-country trails, I would never recommend an enduro bike as your primary bike. That being said, it does fine as long as you don't want to go real fast on the uphills or the flats. So, you know, you can use it as a cross-country type bike if, you know, you just want one bike for the mountains and one bike for tamer trails. You won't be able to keep up with people of somewhat equal fitness on cross-country bikes. Just remember that. So this bike feels like it changes personalities when you start going faster on it. So when you're going on flat trails and uphill sections, it feels a little sluggish. You know, steering's a little heavy because of the slacker head angle. It's got a 36 fork on the front. But when you start to get it up to faster speeds, even these somewhat tame downhills on this trail, the bike just completely changes personality. It becomes more flickable, it becomes just more fun to ride. It just becomes more playful, and that's one thing that I'm really gonna enjoy when I go on my trips to the mountains again, starting next week. So all right, that's gonna wrap up this review. First impressions of the Transition Sentinel. They are really good. I think I'm gonna really like this bike. All right, if you own a Transition Sentinel and you've ridden it on cross-country trails, let me know your thoughts, how you think it feels. You agree with me? And any other questions or comments, drop those below. Thanks for watching.